The Prince of Swords is a fast-moving and interesting card of whom elementally is air of air. And so this is an abundance of air or an excess of mind activity. And so he's moving really quickly throughout all of his thoughts and all of the things he wants to experience. And yet perhaps he's not sticking around long enough to find a deeper meaning in them. On this Rider-Waite card of the Knight of Swords, we can see the character is charging onwards really quickly against the flow of the air. His sword is raised up into the sky and he's charging on, nothing's going to stop him. Interestingly enough, on this Rider-Waite card, he's also travelling from right to left. And so he's travelling from the right brain to the left brain, or from the world of the mind and the creativity into the physical world. So he's putting into manifestation all these thoughts that are coming into his mind, and because he's moving quickly, the thoughts themselves are changing very quickly with that. So this character isn't going to be sticking around for very long, no matter where he is. On the Tree of Life, he's in Tifereth, and Tifereth sees the largest number of Sephiroths cross through it, and so it's a really interesting one. It is very balanced and harmonious, and yet it's quite interesting as this Prince of Swords is here, in that Tifereth is Kether, or pure spiritual light, but lower down, so on a lower element, a lower frequency. And yet it's obviously of a higher frequency than Malkuth and these lower spheres. And so it's a little bit like a child's older brother. He may appear to be very grown up and very wonderful to somebody of whom is lower on a frequency level than what he is. Although, if we understand him for what he is, he's actually much lower than what he could be and what his potential could be. So a child may feel their little brother is really grown up and quite wonderful, and yet when we look back on it later we realise that he was only 18 himself at that time, and so he still was rising up into the best version of himself that he could be. The background of this card, however, is actually quite chaotic, and so there isn't going to be a lot of time for reflection with this character. It's all of the air, of course, the air representing mind activity, thought activity, and so all of this that you can see moving around like a storm almost in the breeze are all of the thoughts and all of the wants and experiences and desires coming in and out of his mind. And he is flying through these thoughts, literally, because these circular spheres here in yellow are actually supposed to represent wings. And we can see the wings on these characters beneath as well, which we will return to. And so he's actually flying through the thoughts, and the wings represent the quality of air. They have the element of air inside of them, and of course the colour yellow represents that element of air as well. And so he is riding on the currents of his thoughts and his desires, and he will stop at nothing to experience these desires, even if they are only temporary, because he is actually riding towards them on a chariot. And this chariot is being pulled along by these winged characters, of whom there are three, of course representing that Trinity, yet again, of which we have seen. And they're also quite fairy-like, and they're also small, and so they're kind of like winged children or fairy beings. And as children, they're going to be very easily distracted by things around them. There is that element of distraction going on in this card. If your chariot was being pulled along by these beings, of whom literally seem to be going in all manner of different directions, the chariot would certainly be in motion and potentially moving very quickly, but its destination would be not entirely sure, because it would be moving from one place to the next based merely upon the temporary state of the mind. And so these fairies could be described as flights of fancy. They are a perfect representation of those thoughts that come and go in our mind. And so for people of whom try to meditate, they often say, I can't meditate because there's all these thoughts coming into my mind, very mundane things like what to get for the shopping, and I need to wash the pots and things like that. And Of course, this is the activity of the mind which distracts us and pulls us into different tangents, and people see it perhaps perfectly with today's world, where they go on the internet to look up a specific thing, and 3 hours later they're reading about something completely unrelated, because they have allowed themselves to be pulled along in their chariot by the whims and flights of fancy of the mind. They have essentially let these small, energetic children pull their mind along. They haven't taken control of the reins and said, this is where I'm going, and that's going to be it. And so, of course, spiritually speaking, that can be a bit of a problem, because you're not actually aiming to a particular goal. And yet, in some ways, he is aiming towards a goal. He just doesn't stick around long enough to see it fully come to fruition. And so you can see he's got a sword held in his right hand, and the colour of this, being that orange or yellow, is again that element of air and the element of the mind. And so this sword is the idea. Of course, it's the dream, the desire, the want of which comes into the mind, because it is on the right hand side, that space of creativity and intellect. And so this is the actual forming of what he wants to experience. It's that little voice in his head that says, go over there and do that. And yet, in his left hand, he holds the opposite for this, of which is actually a scythe or a sickle. And this represents Saturn and death and Father Time and all those things that we've seen over on the major arcana, for example. And so he's creating things, and then he's destroying them. And so he's actually going all out to get to wherever he wants to go, and then when he gets there, he says, right, I've seen that. Doesn't mean anything to me, I'm going on to something else. It could be described as a type of frantic and never-ending search for something perhaps subtle, of which you would need to actually invest more time in to uncover. And so it reminds me a little bit of how some people hop from different religion to religion, and they only stick around for a short period before thinking there's nothing of value in it. And people of whom do things like hill bagging, where they climb up to the top of hills and say, right, I've done that one, and move on to another. They don't slow down and literally stop to smell the flowers, so to speak. And roller coaster cred counting, people who visit theme parks just to tick off that they've done all the different rides, instead of slowing down and actually experiencing the magic and the experiences of which are available to them. But they have to go slower. They have to stop that chatter of the mind and say, this isn't just something to be ticked off. It's something that could actually have that spirit within it, and that answer of which I seek, if I would only give myself and it the time to communicate it to us. And so this prince really is a bit like that. He's going off all over the place, and if you met him, he would be really energetic and he'd be really passionate. But then when you come back to him, he's already moved on to something else. And that's because he's not grounded. His chariot is literally floating through the air, and because of these fairies moving off in different directions, they could be blown off course very easily because of the change in the air. And so he might not even get to where he was originally going in the first place. And yet his mind is occupied with the comings and goings of experience, and that's why he has this helmet or crest upon his head in this deep orange or yellowy colour. This is said to bring us back to Tifereth, and so upon his head is that sphere where all of the different experiences of the universe are crossing through and coming and going. And he wants to experience them all, even if only for a short period. The entire card is quite jagged and geometric in its patterns, and this brings us of course to that large central pattern upon the card, of which represents Hod, because it has 8 separate sides to it if we were to view it in its full 3-dimensional form. Therefore, it would represent the intellect, and also the taking hold of energy and moulding it into separate forms of which we can identify. So it's like getting hold of clay and creating separate things out of it. They're all made out of clay, and yet we can say, well, that one is a bowl, and that one is a little figure of a man, and that one's a jug. It's actually all clay, but we understand the separate forms. They are distinguishable to us. The geometric pattern in general is this. It is all of the things of which make up the physical world around us. It's a representation of, atoms and molecules and all that type of thing, of which have literally been formed into things around us, of which we understand. It's all energy and vibration and waveform, and yet it's been moulded into shapes of which mean something to us, and it's easy for us to communicate their meaning. Here is, in many regards, the true meaning of this card, in that because he's moving so quickly throughout all these things, he doesn't actually see that there is that core to them, and that they're all made out of those same geometrical shapes, of which of course are, at their core, Kether, spiritual light, and all literally the same thing. And so when you get this card, it can really say you need to slow down and partake in the lessons and the deeper experiences that we can learn from all these things around us, instead of just skimming by them on a surface level. And this prince, if we were to meet him, might be able to explain very well and very quickly how something works and how it all fits together, but not what it actually means, either on a personal or on a societal level, so to speak. And so the card could say that the ideas in our lives perhaps need extra time to develop. By merely planting our ideas and watering them for a time before abandoning them, they will never have enough time to bloom. And if we don't give them enough time to grow and to bloom, we will never actually be able to see their colours, because by the time they have come to show us their wonder, we've moved on to something else, and the lessons of which we could have learned, we have left behind us.